and therefore these drugs are contraindicated in pregnancy. So we have different drugs. We have trimethoprim and ometoprine are basic drugs. So trimethoprim and ometoprine, these are the ones that you can use, and you have potentiated sulfonamide. So you have the sulfonamide plus the trimethoprim combination used to reduce the incidence of resistance, the efficacy of a sulfur drug from bacteriostatic to bactericidal. Because if the microorganism has acquired resistance to the sulfonamide, within the combination, it is hit twice. So it is hit twice. So if it acquires resistance to the sulfonamide, it will still be hit in that it will not be able to reduce the dihydrofolic acid to the tetrahydrofolic acid, and therefore it will not be able to make the bases, it will not be able to make the proteins, it will not be able to make the bases, and that will ultimately lead to its death. So we have an example of cotrimoxazole, and cotrimoxazole is what all of us we call it. When you go out there, everybody talks about Septrin. But again, Septrin, I'm not here to sell any particular brand. Septrin is a particular brand. Initially, it was a product of Wellcome. Septrin was a product of Wellcome, and then Glaxo combined with Wellcome, they became Glaxo Wellcome. I do not know where they are now. I haven't followed that story. So Septrin is just a brand from one company, but we call it cotrimoxazole. Cotrimoxazole is a generic name for the combination of sulfamethoxazole plus trimethoprim. I hope you have understood why this combination is much better, bactericidal and not bacteriostatic. Of course, these drugs have been abused for a long time, and therefore there will be a lot of resistance also towards the cotrimoxazole. And of course, we know with the emergence of HIV and AIDS, this is a drug that has been used extensively, even in patients with HIV and AIDS. So of course, this is what we said. You have the para-aminobenzoic acid, of course, with the pteridine, and you have the dihydropteroid synthetase, and this is reversible inhibition. And that inhibition, when you talk about reversible or competitive, that means that the product that is being formed is not, there is no irreversible bonding. It is competitive inhibition. The inhibition is dependent on the concentration of the various metabolites. If the para-aminobenzoic acid is very high in concentration, then the sulfonamide will not be able to bind the enzyme, and the enzyme will go for the para-aminobenzoic acid. So that at that combination, you form your dihydropteroid, and then the dihydropteroid again, using the same enzyme, dihydropteroid synthetase, binds glutamic acids to form a dihydrofolate. So dihydropteroid joins the glutamic acid to form the dihydrofolate, and now the dihydrofolate is the one which is reduced by the dihydrofolate reductase, which is an NADPH, it is NADPH cofactor dependent. So dihydrofolate reductase, and this dihydrofolate reductase is the one which is inhibited by the trimethoprim. It is inhibited by the trimethoprim, and therefore you can see the tetrahydrofolate. And if you compare, you can see that double bond there. That double bond there is there. You can see that double bond there is also that double bond is there. You see that double bond there is lost. So that is saturation there. So you can see that has acquired a hydrogen, that has acquired a hydrogen. So, and then we have any other. So we have that NH2 there. We have the NH. We have that one there. Yeah, it's a di, so you're adding two hydrogens. So dihydro, so you are tetra. It's a tetra, dihydro, it's tetrahydro, because the other one was a dihydrofolate. So now you add two more hydrogen. Now instead from di, it goes to tetra. So the point where we are getting saturation is this point, which was unsaturated in the dihydrofolate. So it is saturated in the tetrahydrofolate. You require this addition of a hydrogen is also reduction. So reduction is loss of oxygen, or addition of hydrogen. So that is also saturation, is also reduction. So you require the enzyme dihydrofolate. Dihydrofolate reductase to give you the tetrahydrofolate, and that is a cofactor that you require as a one carbon transporter, one carbon molecule carrier. So it carries one carbon moieties, and you require those one that carbon one carbon moiety is required in the synthesis of purines, in the synthesis of some of it, some of them will be ionized, but they are poorly ionized. I think that's what they're saying. Majority of them will be in the non-ionized form. They're poorly absorbed. The poorly absorbed sulfonamides, which we did mention, are mainly used for management of intestinal infections. The sulfonamides absorption occurs readily from the parenteral injection site. So you can actually also give them as injections, and because they have good lipid solubility, very poorly ionized, the one, even when they undergo ionization, the one with the higher lipid solubility will move in. Remember, ionization is usually for the purposes of that drug was going into solution. It must first leave the formulation. A drug must leave the formulation. If it remains within the formulation, it will not be absorbed. So once you give that drug, a bit of that drug goes into, it is poorly ionized, so just a little bit of it, the one which is non-ionized, which has the higher lipid solubility, penetrates the lipid membranes. And once that happens, it pushes the equilibrium. Again, the way you were discussing when we were looking at the PPIs, it pushes their equilibrium, so that because of the Richards principle, so more of it go into solution until all the drug has been absorbed. Metabolism of the drug affects its antibacterial. Metabolism of the drug affects its antibacterial and of also its toxicity, where we did mention acetylation. When the drug undergoes acetylation, that means it becomes more toxic, and of course you terminate its biological activity. Sulfonamides are metabolized in the body by either acetylation, oxidation, conjugation with sulfate or glucuronic acid, and cleavage of the heterocyclic rings. We are going to look at this, but you see, we had already mentioned acetylation. There can be oxidation, there can be conjugation with either the sulfate or glucuronic acid, and we are going to look at that. Acetylated, hydroxylated, and conjugated sulfonamides have less, of course, antibacterial activity. Whenever you metabolize to lower the to terminate the biological activity. You are supposed to metabolize to improve on the water solubility, but it does not always happen. When you acetylate, more often than not, to reduce water solubility, but most of the other methods of metabolism do increase water solubility and therefore excretion of the drug. So impaired oral bioavailability of sulfonamides offers advantage locally treated. This is what we have said. The ones that are poorly absorbed, you can remember, like succinyl sulfathiazole, it is too water soluble. Succinyl sulfur, even the guanidine one, too water soluble because of the succinyl. Look at this. NHC double bond O, CH2, CH2, CH2. So 2-hydrophobic drug will not be absorbed as N4-succinyl derivative. So once it gets into the body, it is cleaved to give us the succinyl and the sulfothiazole. Then you have such a drug, and such a drug like this one, which has these benzyl. See, the benzyl group is considered to be a big group. That is 2-hydrophobic drug will not be absorbed as N4-benzoyl derivative. So the absorption of a drug can be either because it is 2-hydrophobic. If it's 2-hydrophobic, it will not go into solution, so it will not be absorbed. If it is too hydrophilic, again, because of its high water solubility, it will not have ability to penetrate the lipid membranes, because you do require a drug with good enough lipid solubility to penetrate the membranes. So we are saying, of course, when you have these drugs or impaired, when you have impaired oral bioavailability, like for succinyl sulfothiazole, you can't use that drug in the stomach, and therefore it will not be distributed. It will remain in the stomach, but it will have some good activity. Then distribution, and the drug distribution or distribution of the sulfonamide happened by passive diffusion, and passive diffusion is mainly dependent on the concentration gradient. So when you talk about passive diffusion, it is mainly by concentration. The gradient sulfonamide is distributed throughout all body tissues, depends on the ionization state of the sulfonamide, vascularity of the tissues, and the fraction of administered dose bound to plasma proteins. Of course, there must be a balance. So whatever is being distributed must, again, distribution, when you talk about distribution, is how that drug is getting into the blood. All the areas the blood is going into, some of that drug keeps leaving. So one, it must have good water solubility so that it can be in the blood. But as even it is in the blood, it is dissolved, a bit of it is ionized in the blood. Remember, there will always be an equilibrium. So some of it will be ionized, others will be anionized. The one which will be anionized, as this blood is moving throughout the body, the portion that is anionized and has good lipid solubility will keep penetrating the membranes. Will keep penetrating. So the drug, as the blood is circulating, the anionized moiety is living and through the lipid membranes and getting into the cells, and that is how the distribution is occurring. That's why we are saying that distribution will depend on the ionization state of the sulfonamide, the vascularity, because you remember most of the drug passes through the thin capillaries, because we say the thin capillaries have pores, and I believe you have done this in drug, because there used to be a unit in pharmacology which I think was being called drug administration. So most of the drug moves out within the very thin capillaries, which usually have pores, and that's what we're talking about, the vascularity of the tissues, including, of course, the blood vessels, and the fraction of the administered dose bound to plasma protein. Again, remember we said when the drug is meta-substituted, some of it will be bound onto plasma proteins or even to tissue proteins. Remember, only the free drug available for distribution, only the free drug is available for absorption, only the free drug is available to bind the receptor. So that's though the dynamics, the balance the dynamics of the ionization, the first vascularity of the tissues, the plasma protein binding, or even the protein binding, that will be what will control the distribution of the drugs. We are saying the unbound drug fraction is the one which freely diffuses or freely penetrates or moves across the membranes. And the ones you will do them in pharmacology. Pharmacokinetics, we are saying the acid-treated drug cause renal damage because of their insolubility. We have already said that. Sulfonamides are excreted as such or as metabolic product. We have said as glucuronide, sulfate conjugates, acetylated products, oxidized products, and so on. We are going to look at the metabolism. They are eliminated in urine, feces, bile, mucus, and sweat. Urine is the main source of the excretion. The mammary glands epithelium is permeable to the non-ionized form. Remember, I've said you will always have ionized in equilibrium with non-ionized. So you can't see a danger here, and that is why we also do not give sulfonamide pregnancy, because it can't penetrate even during breastfeeding. So the mammary gland epithelium is permeable to the non-ionized form of sulfonamides. Sulfonamides having longer plasma disappearance half-lives are generally preferred to those having shorter half-lives because of. And so here we are saying you shouldn't also give sulfonamides to those who are breastfeeding because they will penetrate. And as we have said, these are sulfonamides. They have sulfur, and we do have very many people also, even including children, who can have allergy to sulfur. And we do have many people who have had very terrible, very, very terrible allergic reactions to sulfonamide. So we are saying sulfonamides are also contraindicated in pregnancy. They are also contraindicated in during lactation. They are also contraindicated in neonates. And when, of course, you do a lot of, I don't know whether you're going to mention it somewhere, they can cause what we call canicteras. Canicteras is where the sulfonamides can replace bilirubin. They can replace bilirubin in albumin. They can replace bilirubin because you see, we are saying the sulfonamides do bind plasma proteins. So once you give sulfonamide to the neonates, you find when this sulfonamide crosses the blood-brain barrier, gets in the brain, it can replace bilirubin in the blood. And what happens is that bilirubin, when it is free, it can cause lesions in the brain of the neonate. It's not a problem in the once the person is mature, but in the young brain neonate, then the displaced bilirubin. See, the displaced bilirubin in the brain can cause what we call brain lesion, and that is a condition called canicteras. Canicteras is that condition. In case you give a sulfonamide to a neonate, the sulfonamide displaces bilirubin from the albumin binding. There is very high concentration of bilirubin, and that high concentration of bilirubin in the brain can cause lesions. Lesions are ulcers or wounds in the brain, resulting in the condition we call canicteras, and therefore sulfonamides are really not allowed. They are contraindicated, as we have said in pregnancy, as we have said in lactation, and also in the neonates. Now we're looking at the metabolism, and we have said they can be metabolized through glucuronic conjugation, sulfate conjugation, and the first one is through glucuronic conjugation. And glucuronidation, which is the glucuronic conjugation, occurs mainly at the aromatic amine N4 or other nucleophilic amine to form inactive water-soluble metabolites. You know, glucuronic acid, that is a glucuronic acid. And once you have the glucuronic acid, then it can, this is our sulfonamide. Which sulfonamide is this? Can you kindly tell me which sulfonamide is this from what we have learned? Which sulfonamide is that, class? Guys, I need to rest my... Which sulfonamide is this? Can I get an answer? Which sulfonamide is this? Which sulfonamide is this, class? I need to rest my throat. Which sulfonamide is that? Sulfoxes are correct. Thank you. So that's sulfonamide. Just to sometimes just to rest my voice a bit. So that is sulfoxes are correct. And we are therefore saying you can see sulfoxes has that amino group. So this amino group, which is free, this group, this side, is already combined with the isoxaz of heterocyclic ring. So we are therefore saying it can either be combined, we have said it can either combine with the N4, which is this, or other nucleophilic amine to give us the inactive water-soluble compound. So you can see in sulfoxazole, it actually combines with the nitrogen of the isoxazole moiety to give you the N-glucuronide. So this is an example where it can be able to combine. The glucuronide can actually combine with, of course, the UDPs for purposes of activation of the glucuronic acid. So this can combine with the nitrogen of the isoxazole ring to give us the N-glucuronide. So that's just an example of one where it can combine. We have said it can also combine with the N4, and if it combines with the N4, it will also give you a glucuronide. Acetylation can also occur, and we had already mentioned acetylation when we were looking at sulfathiazole, and we are looking at this drug here, and there is this R. So that hydrogen, so that is SO2NHR, SO2. Here they are acetylating it at this position, but do remember already this one is acetylated. So we are starting with one which is already acetylated. So we are saying acetylation can occur at both N1 and N4 to form inactive, usually with low water solubility at urine pH. So remember when we were looking at sulfathiazole, we acetylated the 4 amino group. So this already is acetylated, but we are saying it can happen in N1 and N4. So even this position here, there can be replacement of the hydrogen with the acetyl group. So in this one, this is what has been. So you can acetylate either at that position or you can acetylate at that position. I believe more often than not, you will not acetylate at both at the same time. Once you acetylate one, it's okay. So like when we looked at the sulfathiazole, we acetylated at that point, and of course the metabolism highly water insoluble. It was, of course, precipitated. It can also acetylate this position, and the drug still will become water insoluble. And depending on which one it is, depending on the R, whether if R is a very potent electron withdrawer, then the acetylated metabolite will still be excreted without any problem. So that is the second route of metabolism. The third route of metabolism is information of hydroxyamine oxidation, and that's where we say the oxidation. It occurs at aromatic amine to form cytotoxic hydroxyamine. You could remember when we were looking at paracetamol. Remember when we were looking at paracetamol to form the iminoquinone, and whenever you have an aniline or an amino, an aniline or amino derivative of benzene amino derivative, that amino group be hydroxylated to the hydroxyamine, and hydroxyamines unfortunately allow for the formation of very, very toxic metabolites, or very, very electrophilic metabolites. And those highly electrophilic metabolites can bind the tissues, like in the liver, to give you hepatotoxicity. So we are starting with that aniline there. And remember, even as we saw with the paracetamol, that aniline group there, highly, highly toxic, and it can first of all undergo oxidation to give us the nitro group. Once it forms the nitro group, then it undergoes reduction to give us the hydroxyamine. And unfortunately, hydroxyamine has been found to be highly, highly cytotoxic, and this molecule can bind, that molecule, highly toxic, can bind the tissues to bring us there's a place we're calling it, this is the toxic metabolite, highly toxic metabolite. It can bind the tissues and can result in hepatotoxicity, and that's why we're calling it cytotoxic hydroxyamine. So those are the main three routes of metabolism. Drug interactions. Of course, we've already said, because with these drugs, the sulfonamides are protein bound. Any drug that is protein bound will bring about drug interaction by binding itself to the protein and displacing whichever drug was bound. Sulfonamides can increase the blood thinning effects of warfarin, possibly leading to abnormal bleeding. This is because of drug interaction, or where there's remember I've mentioned warfarin several. Warfarin, unfortunately, has a very, very narrow therapeutic index. Remember, it is an anticoagulant. Therefore, if you give sulfonamides to a person who is on warfarin, the sulfonamides will displace warfarin from the protein binding, and the free warfarin will be in very high concentration. Remember, the free drug is the one which causes problems. So, and warfarin has a very narrow therapeutic index, and therefore it will cause hemorrhage. Also, sulfonamides can crystallize in the urine when the urine is acidic, since methamine causes acidic urine, should not be used with sulfonamide. So you're saying acidic drugs can have issues. Increased blood levels of potassium occur when sulfamethoxazole trimethoprim is combined with angiotensin converting enzyme. So increased blood levels of potassium. Increased blood levels. Potassium, again, potassium is very toxic because it has an influence on the heart. So again, one has to be very, very careful. So we are saying increased blood levels of potassium will occur when cotrimoxazole, this is what we call cotrimoxazole, is combined with angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors. Remember, angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors are the drugs that block this enzyme, the angiotensin converting enzyme enzyme. So they're the drugs that inhibit the angiotensin converting enzyme, and the angiotensin converting enzyme converts angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2 is a potent vasoconstrictor. Angiotensin 2 is a potent vasoconstrictor. So when you give angiotensin inhibitors, they will act as antihypertensives because they will block the angiotensin converting enzyme, so you will not get angiotensin 2. And as I have said, angiotensin 2 is a potent vasoconstrictor. So we are saying, therefore, if you combine those two drugs, you will get increased potassium. Again, by the end of the journey, all these drugs, you will know them well. The increased metabolism, that's it could be you have already studied antihypertensive. The increased metabolism or breakdown and elimination of cyclosporin by the liver caused by sulfonamide, because the kidney damage caused by unmetabolized. So the increased metabolism or breakdown and elimination of cyclosporin by the liver caused by sulfonamides. This I have to check later. Contraindication, they of course pregnancy, newborn and infants, patients on methenamine, tolbutamide, and oral anticoagulants. I know that point will come back. I know it is here. So we have sulfonamides and cycloserine. We are saying increased metabolism of cycloserine caused by sulfonamide reduces the effectiveness of cyclosporin. What is cyclosporin used for? Have you mentioned cyclosporin anywhere? Have you mentioned cyclosporin anywhere, class? Anywhere you have mentioned cyclosporin? Mention that drug anywhere? Cyclosporin. Have you mentioned it anywhere, class? Yes or no? Cyclosporin, have you mentioned it anywhere? Cyclosporin, have you mentioned it anywhere, class? Yes or no? Kwa nini mmenyamaza? Have you mentioned it anywhere? Or is it that I'm not seeing your response? Have you mentioned cyclosporin anywhere, class? I'm not asking you to look it up. I'm only asking, have you mentioned it anyway? It's either yes or no. Kwani mumeenda muko wakati kile mnachukua muda, or you are googling. Mention cyclosporin anywhere? Yes, Daniel. You mentioned cyclosporin anywhere? Yes or no? And if you have, what is it used for? or you have not yet mentioned it. I believe, if I'm not wrong, cyclosporine is mainly used, if I'm not wrong, as an immunosuppressant, if I'm not wrong. For patients, you see these patients who get transplant, if I'm not wrong, they are put on cyclosporine to try and prevent rejection. You know, when you do a transplant, that organ that you give that person, especially let's say in kidney transplant, that organ is taken can be easily rejected because of course it has come with different genetic makeup completely, because that's why you really look for a proper match, so that the difference in genetic makeup is very small. But no matter how close they are, there will still be some difference, and that can cause rejection of that organ. So that you suppress the rejection, I believe you give cyclosporine, but you can always confirm later. But I think at the best of my remembrance, because I can also forget, but I believe cyclosporine is used to suppress rejection during a transplant. So